Hi friends, welcome to another video. In this video, we are going to talk about Azure Active Directory. So we'll see some components of Azure AD and how exactly Azure AD is designed. So when you talk about Azure Active Directory, it is nothing but it is an identity and access management service available to you. So if you see, this is an identity and access management service and which can help you to basically create internal as well as external users, and you can provide them different level of access within your environment. So when I say Azure Active Directory, it is not just a IAM service, but it also gives you a lot of other features or benefits along with it. So it gives you security options. It gives you options to connect to enterprise applications. So it consists of a lot of different components bundled together as Azure Active Directory. So if I want to understand Azure Active Directory, let's take an analogy of a flat. Okay. So when I talk about Azure Active Directory, what you're doing, let's say this is a building. Okay. So let's say this is a building which is owned by someone and you're renting out a flat. So let's say you have different flats on all the floors. Let's say you have a 15-floor building, and in that 15-floor building, you have all of these flats available to you. Okay. So when I say Azure Active Directory, it basically means there is a Azure Active Directory instance created by Microsoft in their data center. So Microsoft data center is the building that we're talking about. And within this Microsoft data center building, you have different flats, or you can say different areas where your Azure Active Directory tenant is registered. Just like a flat you rent, or you basically you rent out a flat, you see different floors over there, and each flat will have an address. Similarly, in Azure, you have a GUID assigned to a tenant. So whenever you create a tenant, a globally unique ID is assigned to you. That identity you can't change. So it is assigned by Microsoft. Just like an address, you can't change an address of a flat. Similarly, you can't change the GUID of Azure AD tenant. And when you sign up for Azure Active Directory tenant, so let's say this is your tenant. When you sign up for this tenant, let's say our tenant is tailwind.com. Maybe this is our tenant. When you sign up for this tenant, by default, there is a onmicrosoft.com domain name given to you. So you'll get a domain name like onmicrosoft.com. So whenever you register for it, first your company name will be there. So whatever your company name will be there. And then it will be appended by onmicrosoft.com. Okay. So this is the default tenant that you're going to get when you register for Azure Active Directory. There are options if you want to change this tenant. So maybe I don't want to have this default tenant available to me. So what I can do, I can change this default tenant into this tenant by basically adding a custom domain name. Custom domain name. So when I add a custom domain name, in order to add a custom domain name, what you need to either add a TXT record or a mail exchange record or MX record in your public DNS registrar in order to verify the domain. Verify domain. Okay. So when I sign up to Azure, I will see some of these things like this. Let me show this on the portal. So when I sign up to Azure, I will find my Azure Active Directory created for me. And once you go to your Azure Active Directory, you'll see this area where a tenant ID is shown to you. So this is your globally unique ID. Just like you have an address in a flat, you have the opportunity to have a globally unique ID. Also, some organization name will be given to you. So you will get a default organization name, but this organization name we can change. Just like if you have your house, you may name your house based on your liking, right? So you may name your house based on your first name or maybe your favorite pet. Similarly, you have the opportunity to rename the tenant that you've registered. And where do we rename this tenant? So for example, I have named my tenant as Neeraj Org. Where do you rename it? You basically go to this properties area, and in this properties area, you get the opportunity to rename your tenant. So I can change this property but I can't change the tenant ID. Think of tenant ID like a globally unique ID, just like an address for a flat. So you can't change the address of the flat, but you can always change the name of your flat. Okay, so that's how this is designed. Now, going back over here. So basically you can change the name, but you can't do anything else with it. Now, talking about Azure AD components, there are a lot of components which are part of Azure Active Directory. So if I say, what are the different components of Azure AD? Or I can say what all components can connect to Azure AD. So Azure AD is used by a lot of Microsoft product and some third-party products as well. So if I show you all the products that can be connected to this, you can see a list of products over here. So Azure Active Directory is also connected to Microsoft 365. So whenever you create a tenant, it basically automatically connects or creates the Azure Active Directory tenant in the backend. So if I sign up for Microsoft 365, it basically creates the Azure Active Directory tenant for me in the backend as well. So this is there. Plus, if you create any Dynamics 365 users, they also connect to Azure Active Directory tenant. If you are working with Intune, this also basically connects to your Azure Active Directory. If you're creating B2C collaboration, what do I mean by B2C? Let's say I'm registering my application. And when I register my application, I have the opportunity to invite some guests which are outside of my company. And when I'm inviting these guests, I have the option to basically add them to a separate tenant called B2C tenant. Okay, so you have the option to add them to this B2C tenant. For example, you're creating a gaming application, and that gaming application will be used by people who log in by using Facebook, by using Hotmail, by using Gmail, any of those social accounts. So for that management of those user flows, you basically create a B2C tenant, or it is also called as business to customer tenant. Where do you actually see this? Let me show this on the Azure portal as well. So when you sign up for Azure Active Directory tenant, a default tenant is created for you. You can change the name of the same, but you have this opportunity to go to this manage tenant over here. So within your Azure Active Directory, within this area, you see this area called manage tenants. If I click on this area, it basically takes me to an area where it shows me all the tenants I already own. So you can see I already own like 3 tenants. One of those tenants is a B2C tenant. How did I go about creating this tenant? You basically click on create. And once you click on create, it gives you the opportunity to either create an Azure AD tenant, or you have the opportunity to create a B2C tenant. So if you want to connect to social accounts and you want to share your applications with those social users, you create a B2C tenant. If I click on next, it shows me the organization name, initial domain name that will be assigned to me, what country I'll be part of. It also shows me the subscription that it will be part of, and you have to store this B2C tenant in a specific location. So you have to store it in a resource group over here. So you can define whatever name you want. So whatever your company name is going to be, you can maybe have the same name for your B2C tenant as well. This domain will automatically be appended by on Microsoft.com. So whatever tenant you choose, this will be automatically appended by this domain name. Okay. If I go back to my Azure Active Directory, you can see currently I see a primary domain name with this domain name, cloudtechtrainers.com. But initially, when you configure Azure Active Directory, that is not the case. You will not see this primary domain over there. Initially, when you configure Azure Active Directory, you will see a default name. So for me, my default name of the tenant was this. So if you see, my default name was neerajtrainer.onmicrosoft.com. How do you change this name to your custom domain name? You do this by going to custom domain options. So if I go back over here in my Azure Active Directory, you can see this area called as custom domain names. Within this custom domain name, if I click on this, you can see all the domain names that I've already registered or I have verified. So you can see cloudtechtrainers.com. This is verified. If you see, this is my default domain name, which is also available to me. Then I have quite a few other domain names which are not verified. So if I want to verify them, or if I want to add a custom domain of my own, what I will do, I'll add a custom domain over here. So you click on add custom domain. If I click on add custom domain, I have the opportunity to provide the domain name that I own. So maybe I'm basically registering a domain called xyz.com. If I already own this domain name, I'll type the domain name and click on add domain. Once you click on add domain, it'll ask you to verify the domain. So if I don't own the domain, I can't verify it. In order to verify it, what I need to do, either I need to add a TXT record or a MX record in my public registrar. So wherever I've registered my domain name, I need to go to the registrar and I need to either add a text record there or I have to add a mail exchange record there. Once I add that record, once I'm done adding the record, I'll come back over here to my custom domain names and you will see that that domain name will be shown as verified, just like this one. And once it is verified, what I can do, I can go back to my users and within my users, I can assign that custom domain name. So for example, I have a user called as Chris Green. If I want to assign that custom domain name to this user, I'll click on edit properties. And within edit properties, I can change this default domain name to maybe my custom domain name. So you do this, and once you're done with this, you basically save the property and this username will be modified to this custom domain name that I own. If I go back over here, if you go back to users, you can see I've already changed some of the domain names for some of the users. So you can see this is the domain name which is changed for this user. So you see this is a custom domain name. So you don't want Microsoft.com domain name to be assigned to your users. You always want your company domain name to be assigned to your users in order for them to log into your tenant. Okay, so this is all about a brief overview of different services offered by Azure Active Directory. If you want, we can continue this discussion and we can talk about other services offered by Azure AD. That's it for today's video. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.